Hi, this is Darlene from Digital Photo Mentor. In this tutorial, I'm going to go through something that is often requested in my portrait classes, and that is my workflow for how to process a portrait using Lightroom in under 10 minutes. So grab a beverage and let's get started. Welcome back. Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take a portrait from out of camera to from this, what you see on screen now, to this in less than 10 minutes. So that includes the basic processing and even a little bit of retouching. I do very little retouching outside of Lightroom. I do most of my work inside of Lightroom, so including softening skin and brightening and whitening eyes and teeth. So let's have a look at the before and after again. So let's begin with the original. I'm working with a raw file. So when you're working with a raw file, you have a lot more options, including things like the pull down menu we see over on the right here, which is the white balance. We're able to see a lot more options for white balance when we're shooting raw. Okay, so I'm going to work fairly quickly in this tutorial because I want to work real time to show you that I really do this in under 10 minutes. Okay, so the first things that I'm going to do when I look at my file is I'm going to correct the color balance, so the white balance, and I'm going to correct any exposure or contrast problems that I have. There could be too much contrast or too little contrast. So I'm going to work through the basic panel, then I might tweak some things like sharpness and noise reduction if I have any noise in my image, and then I'm going to move down to things like adding a vignette and doing some lens correction. So basically I'm going to work down the panels on the right from top to bottom. And then lastly, I'm going to use some of the adjustment tools like the healing brush, the adjustment brush, and possibly even an edge vignette or a radial vignette. One other thing I want to mention is that I work with a Wacom tablet and pen, so I do my retouching with a pen and a tablet. It takes a little bit of getting used to when you first get one. It takes about 2 weeks and you kind of want to curse at it for a while, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're doing a lot of retouching to your portraits. It's really going to save your wrist and you're going to be able to be more accurate, and it also is pressure sensitive. So just like a brush on a painting, the harder you press on the tablet, the more pressure you get with your paintbrush or whatever tool you're using. Okay, so that works for Lightroom and Photoshop or any of the photo editing programs. Highly recommend a Wacom tablet. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is look at my histogram and my contrast range. In this image, that's a nice window light portrait of this model. And I'm looking at the histogram and it doesn't quite touch the edges. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have a good contrast range in your image, that you have something that touches both edges, which will ensure that you have nice whites and nice blacks. To check if you have anything clipping, hold down the Option or Alt key and click the white slider. Okay, you'll see everything go black. Anything that is clipped will show up as a color. So as I move this to the right, I'm increasing the white. You'll start to see some areas clipping and you'll see the histogram moving to the right. So I do that and then I pull it back just until they all disappear. Okay, because I want pure white. So when I have the clipping, it's clipped with no detail. When I get rid of that, I still have white, but with a detail. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and that's at plus 28. Then I'm going to do the same thing using the Alt Option key again with the black slider. So now you can see that I have no blacks. Now in this case, I actually want to clip a little bit of the blacks. Blacks are a good thing to have, and shadows being clipped is not so much a bad thing. So I'm actually going to go to minus 35. So you can adjust contrast a few different ways. You can adjust it using the contrast slider or the tone curve. I use the whites and the black sliders first because it stretches out my tone curve from either end and gives a really true representation of blacks and whites. Let's do a quick before and after. I'm using the backslash key. So you can see before it looks a little flat. Now she's got a nice contrast. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is a color adjustment or a white balance. When you're shooting with RAW, again, you have all these options in your pull down menu for white balance that you do in your camera. So I am using a RAW file. I'm going to use the eyedropper, which is a targeted adjustment tool. I know that she was wearing a white shirt, so I'm going to click on her white shirt, Okay, now that gives me a perfectly neutral file. It's a little more blue than I would like, so I'm actually just going to drag the yellow slider a bit more to the right and make it a little bit warmer. So somewhere in between where I started and where it is now. Okay, I'm going to give her a little more pink. The bottom slider varies between green on the left and pink on the right. Generally, you don't want people to be green. You don't want them to look like Kermit, although, you know, Kermit we love, but we don't want them to be green. So I'm just going to give her a little bit more pink. So again, a quick before and after. I do before and after a lot so that I can see that what I'm doing is actually making a difference. Okay. Now, if you have any highlights like this area on her shirt that's a little bright, you can pull your highlight slider down, so it's not going to change the white. It's just going to bring some detail back into some of the areas that are just below pure white. So you can see as I pull it all the way down what it's doing. Okay, I don't want to pull it all the way, but just a little way so I can get a bit more detail in her shirt. And I might actually use an adjustment brush to bring a bit more in as well. Okay, so these are what's called global adjustments, and it affects the entire picture. When you start using things like the adjustment brush, that is a local adjustment and you can paint it only in a certain area. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give her a bit of clarity. Generally when I'm doing people pictures, I never want to go above about 15. Okay, when we go really high you can see what happens. So I'm going to put her at about 13 or so. Okay. The clarity slider just is not real flattering to people pictures. You want to keep it a bit on the lower side. Okay. Vibrance and saturation looks pretty good. I'm not going to enhance that at all. I am going to do a quick little trip over to my left hand side here on my panel. You'll notice that I have a lot of presets. Okay. I have a bunch that I've created, one including skin tone. So when I click on this one, it runs a little preset like a Photoshop action, and it applies some color in my image. You notice that these sliders now have been increased saturation in the orange and yellow, right, and a little bit on the hue and the red. And if I turn that off, you can see that it's actually just affecting her skin tone and giving her a nice tan. So I kind of like that. Okay. Now if I decide that I want the overall image a little bit brighter, I can just give it a tiny bit more exposure. So there's kind of this dance that you do between the two sliders, the whites and the blacks, pulling back your highlights and your exposure. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. It looks like a really good exposure. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and check and see if I have any, well, that's a nice close-up of her teeth, any noise in my image. This was shot at 400, so there shouldn't be a lot of noise. And where you want to look for that is sort of in the shadow areas. You're going to see it maybe in the corner of her eye. There's a tiny little bit of noise, but at 400, it's not so bad. So I might bring it up a little bit and then just leave it. Okay. Sharpness is another one you can use the little option Alt key. When you click on the Alt key, it will show you, you can slide your sharpness way up. Okay, masking is just like masking in Photoshop, right? So now everything is showing because it's white. As I slide my mask to the right and it starts showing some black, only the parts that are white are being sharpened. So you notice that as the further I go, her skin isn't being sharpened, but her eyes and her teeth are. So that's a really effective way of sharpening portraits without sharpening the skin. Okay, so her eyes are sharper. It's very subtle, you can see it, but her skin is not increasing in sharpness. Okay? Increased skin sharpness adds to showing more texture, and that's certainly not something that you want to do with your portraits. Okay? Now to get in and out, I'm just hitting the space bar. Okay? Lens corrections. Lens corrections is something that Lightroom does automatically for you if your lens is loaded into Lightroom. So you can just click Enable Profile, and it recognizes what lens you're using, and then it gets rid of the distortion and any vignetting that you have on your lens. If it doesn't find your lens, you can choose it from the list, right? Or you can do it manually. I also remove chromatic aberration, and that's any color fringing that your lens might do. This lens doesn't, working with an 85mm lens, and this one doesn't have a lot of chromatic aberration, but it's simple to take off that, and if you have any, you'll see it as an outline around your image. You'll see like a pink outline. There's a tiny bit there. And if you can see this little green fringe around her shirt, it's kind of out of focus. When I turn on the chromatic aberration, that goes away. Okay, so chromatic aberration is just simply your lens not focusing all the colors to the same point. Okay, okay, next I'm going to add a vignette because I want to darken the edges a little bit, but I don't want to darken her. Okay, so an edge vignette under effects is a good way to do that. So I'm going to use highlight priority under this pull down menu. Color works fairly well too if you're using a colorful scene, but I have a lot of highlights here that I want to maintain. So going to the left is going to darken it. Now if, for example, I wanted a light vignette, which I might want on this portrait, I could go to the right. Okay? So the first thing that I do is I'm going to darken it a little bit, and then I'm going to make my feather 0. And the reason I do that is that it shows me the shape of my vignette. So now I can adjust my shape. I'm going to go more round, bring it in a little tighter so that you can see where my vignette is applying. You can see where it's going really easily now, right? And then I'm going to put the feather back up somewhere between 80 and 100, so it has a very soft edge from dark to light, right? Then I'm going to bring the highlights up, so I maintain some of the highlights in those corners. So let's turn it off and on and see what it's doing. Right? And if you feel that it's too much, you can try color priority, or you can just simply not make it quite as dark. Right? The other thing that I noticed, now that I've done sort of all the global effects, is I'm going to get into the local adjustments, that the right-hand side of the picture is brighter than the left. That's because that's where the light source is coming from. There's a window. So I'm going to use my gradient tool, which is great for vignettes, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut M. I'm going to erase everything by double-clicking effect, and I'm going to do minus exposure and minus highlights because I know that's going to work well on this side. And once you apply it, you can always change it. Okay? So that's the great thing about all these tools. They're non-destructive. Oh, see in there, I screwed up. Okay, so you're going to click and drag, and it's going to give you the spread. So the spread is from where it's going to apply from there to there, fading out. Okay? And then you can decide how far you pull it in. Now remember that shirt of hers was a little bit light, so I can actually angle it this way to kind of cut some of that light down on her shirt as well, and kill two birds with one stone, as it were. Right? So we can try and do a little bit of that too. So we want to make sure we don't go too far when we're darkening down nice. You don't want to make it be like this and be really obvious. You want it to be very subtle. It's a tone control. Okay? You don't want somebody to look at your photo and say, "Oh, nice retouching." Okay? You want them to say, "Nice photo." So M gets me out of that tool. And now that I'm looking at it again, I'm going to say, okay, now she's just a little bit dark, so I'm going to give her just a touch more light overall, now that we've toned down that side. Okay, so it's a game of fractions here. Okay, so the other thing we can do is add a radial filter, which is Shift M, and that allows you to do a circular or an oval adjustment. Okay, now I've still got, it remembers the last settings you used, so it's going to go minus exposure and minus highlights. So where I drag my circle, it's going to apply on the outside of the circle. If I invert it, it applies on the inside. Okay? You can adjust the feather, how much feather it has, just like on the other vignette. You can adjust the placement and how wide your circle is. Right? So if I decide that's too much, which I think it is, we can just scale it back a little bit. Right? The other thing you can do with this is you can actually do minus clarity and blur your background out a little bit more as well. Okay, so I want to keep her nice and sharp, but let's say I want to blur that background a little bit more. Okay, that's going to be a nice effect. Okay, again, keep it subtle, don't go too far. Okay, so let's do a quick before and after. So already we've only been doing this a few minutes. There's a before and there's our after. Okay, so if you're not going to do any retouching on your portrait, you're pretty much done. The next thing I would get into is using the healing or cloning tool and the adjustment brush, which are the local adjustments. This is where I'm going to adjust individual places on the image, the little spots. So I still think her shirt is a little bright, so let's use the adjustment brush. Keyboard shortcut is K. I've still got those same settings. It tends to remember what you did last. If you don't want them anymore, just double click on effect and all of them will go away. Anytime you double click on any of these words, it resets to 0. So I'm going to paint with a fairly large brush. You can set the flow. I'm going to go about 30% or so. And I'm just going to paint on her shirt. Now because I'm using the tablet, the harder I press, the more it applies. Right? I might want to go in a smaller one and pick up a little more detail in her hair as well, if I feel that I'm losing some highlights in her hair. Right? So let's just do that again. Let's do it before and after. So I'm just doing before and after on the adjustment brush, and you can see that it's just darkening her shirt and a little bit of her hair. Okay, so I'm liking what that's doing. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of any skin imperfections or blemishes. Okay, Jill's a model, so she's got pretty good skin. We've got nice sharp eyes, but everybody's got a few imperfections because we're human, right? We don't expect everybody to be perfect. So the general rule of thumb that I follow when I'm retouching or cloning or removing anything is, if it's something that is temporary on the face, such as a blemish, like these small ones here, I'm going to get really small here. I'm just going to really literally swipe them, and Lightroom does the job of finding a new spot. If it doesn't do a good job, I just help it find a new spot. Okay, so anything that's temporary, like a blemish, like a sunburn, that kind of thing, I'm going to remove it entirely. Now you notice that she's got sort of like a little scar or something here on her eyebrow, and she's also got one up here on her forehead. Now I could remove those, or you also have the option of turning down your opacity. So I could brush it over and then turn down the opacity so that it just fades it out a little bit and makes it less obvious. I will do that a lot with things like circles under eyes. If people have dark circles under their eyes, let's do an example here. You always want your brush to be an appropriate size, so I'm using the bracket keys. So right now I'm going to get rid of some of this under her eyes. So let's take a look at what happens if I turn my opacity down. Okay, we just get very subtle removal of that circle under the eye, whereas if we go all the way, it starts to look a little bit too fake. So again, subtlety and softness is the key. Right? We don't want to change the look of the person. We just want to enhance a little bit. You know, maybe they had not enough sleep last night. Maybe they've got allergies, which is a very huge contributing factor to circles under the eyes. A lot of young children have circles under the eyes. And depending on that type of thing, I will soften them and generally not remove them entirely. Okay, you want them to look healthy and alive, but you still want them to look like themselves. Okay, so I work pretty quickly. Things like moles, again, I'm generally not going to remove those. That's part of their face. If it's something that stands out or is catching the light, I may lighten it so that it's not really obvious. But generally a blemish I will remove, and a mole or a beauty spot I'm going to leave. She's got a lot of freckles, and I'm not going to remove those. That's part of her face. Okay, so that's about it for the cloning tool. Sometimes when you're doing makeup and things like that, you'll get like little spots inside there where you pick up a sparkle or something. You can get rid of those too. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the cloning tool. The next thing I'm going to do, so Q is my keyboard shortcut to open and close that. Okay, let's do before and after. So you can see, really subtle. It's just cleaning her skin up, but she still looks like her. Okay, and I saw a little one down here I'm going to get rid of. So a little makeup spot. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some enhancements. Enhancements are where you have to be really careful. So I'm going to use the adjustment brush. Now I have a bunch of presets, and I'll let you know what settings I'm using on these. So I have one that's iris brighten, I have one that's iris enhance, I have one that is eye brighten, eye whiten. Okay, so the eye whiten one is -39 saturation, highlights +62, and exposure +28. I'm going to work at a flow of 30 and a density of 100, keeping my brush small. Okay, now remember, because I'm using a pressure sensitive tablet, I'm going gently. You do not want to overdo this. Okay, so I'm going to do it soft, and then I'm going to show you what overdone looks like just to see the difference. Okay, something that I've seen in magazines, it tends to be a trend. Okay, so there's her eyes. I'm just going to do a before and after. So that's with it turned off. You can see her eyes are a little dim, turned on. Okay, this is overdone. Okay, when you have eyes that look like that, okay, she's got demonic eyes now. Okay, that is not normal. Okay, you don't want to make your person's eyes glow. That does not flatter them. Okay, that's again getting into the realm of too much over retouching. Okay, so just deactivate, activate your point again and tone it back down. Okay, so I think I was down about here. Okay. You can take the saturation down quite far, especially if somebody has red in their eyes. If they've had, you know, sleep problems, that's going to take out a lot of the red out of their eyes as well. Again, very gentle. Okay. To make a new point, just click new. I have another one for teeth whiten, which I'm going to do. It's very similar. It's minus saturation plus exposure. I probably could use the same one. And again, I'm just going to paint ever so gently. You don't want to overdo. you just want to take out if they have any yellowing in their teeth, or if they look sort of gray or shadowed just because of the way they're smiling, just brighten them up a little bit. So you don't want the devil person, you don't want glowing teeth, you just want clean. Okay? I do them as separate points from the eye because then they're adjustable separately if I decide I want to change it. Another favorite one I use is something called Iris Enhance. This is a great one, and it's got plus saturation up to almost plus 70, plus 66 clarity, plus 35 shadows, and plus 60 or so exposure. I'm probably going to turn that down a little bit. Okay, so what it's doing is it's bringing up the brightness and the color inside the iris here. Make your brush just about the size of the iris, and I'm still using flow. Let's go about 50% flow and just do a wash through the iris. Okay? Look at the magic that does on her eye. Okay? Now bringing the clarity up changes the contrast in the eye. So let's take a look at before and after on her face. Okay? Just brightens her up a little bit, but she doesn't look too scary. The last one I'm going to do is something called the Glamour Brush. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see her whole face. This is a favorite one that I use on all portraits, and it's minus about 58 clarity. I'm going to go plus about 15 to 20 highlights and plus contrast. So plus 35 contrast. I'm definitely going to paint with a little bit more opacity this time because you can turn it down after. Okay, so I'm going to paint with about 80% opacity and a really large brush. And you'll see why I'm going to do that in a minute. Right? I'm also going to turn on what's called the mask. So as I paint, you don't see the area that's being painted. You see it take effect, press the O key, and your mask shows up. So now I have this red glow, which is showing me where I'm painting. Okay, so as I paint in with this adjustment brush, I can control where it's going. Okay, now the one thing I don't want to do, I'm going to turn my mask off for a second so you can see what it's doing. Okay, so it's softening her skin, but she still has detail. Okay, so the one thing you don't want to do is do that over the eyes and the lips. Okay, so I actually want to erase bits of it. So holding my Alt Option key down, it automatically gives me the eraser. And I can just paint out, and I'm going at almost 100% here. So I'm sort of undoing these areas, right? So using a tablet, I brush gently and I get a softer stroke. Okay, so the harder you press on the tablet, oh, see, I clicked the wrong dot. I changed to her eye. You got to make sure you don't cross over and click the wrong dot. Okay, and also her teeth. So I want her lips and her eyes to be absolutely sharp. The thing that's going to help your portraits look sharp is the eyes. So for sure you want to keep the eyes sharp. If you do any softening at all, make sure you keep it on the skin. And I'm also removing it on her nostrils because that adds contrast, the deep dark of the nostrils. Okay, so I've removed it off the eyes, lips, nose. Okay, and that's what I got so far. Okay, so let's just back out. Now I'm looking at that and I'm going, okay, I think her teeth have gone a little too far. So I'm just going to select that one and scale it back a little bit so it's not quite so far because she's got pretty nice teeth. Right? And if you've gone too far on anything else, you can check out your whites. You can do part erase. If it's just a part, like this one here might be too bright. I might erase it just a little bit, right, without erasing the rest. Right? Okay, again, that's looking better. So look at your image full size again. Look at it close up, but look at it full screen also, and make sure that she's not, you know, glowing in the dark. I would probably scale those eyes back a little bit again. I've gone too far to show you what's happening. Okay, let's just scale that back. We'll go a little bit less on the exposure. There we go. That's better. Okay. So that's really about it. That is all I'm going to do in that portrait. So let's take a look at the before and after again. There's our before. A little on the flat side. We've got some contrast issues. And then there's our after. So we've corrected color. We've warmed up her skin tone. We've softened her. But you'll notice that when we've softened her, she still has detail. And you can still see that she has pores in her skin. Okay, so you don't want to get that plasticky look that seems to be popular in the magazines. You want them to look like a person. So that is my portrait retouching workflow using Lightroom. I hope that gives you some great tips, and go ahead and try that yourself. Take care, and we'll see you next time.